Good evening, and welcome back to Tranquil Arc Chronicles, where history drifts softly between dream and darkness. Tonight, our story begins where silence is deepest, where words no longer echo through halls, but through water. They say that every book remembers its reader, and some remember too well. In the northern mist of Scotland lies a loch that never warms, its waters still as glass, its depths older than the dam that birthed it. Beneath that quiet surface once stood a village named Kilmara, and at its heart a library of red granite and sorrow. When progress came and the dam was raised, the people fled, all except one, the librarian, who chose to remain among her shelves as the valley filled and the river claimed her stories. They say she still reads below, her voice carried in bubbles and currents, her candlelight flickering like a thought that refuses to die. On mist-bound nights, fishermen swear they see her window glowing, and if you listen closely, you can hear pages turning underwater. Tonight, we follow that sound. A modern diver will descend into the drowned remains of Kilmara, seeking to recover the past, and instead awaken it. So find a quiet place, let the room grow still. Close your eyes and drift with the tide, for the water remembers more than we wish to know. This is the library beneath the lake, a story of drowned memories, forgotten voices, and a reading that never ends. Now we begin. The Library Beneath the Lake, Chapter 1. The Water Takes Kilmara. There are places in Scotland where the past never dries, where water sits heavy upon memory, pressing it down, sealing it in glassy silence. Kilmara was one of those places. Once, it was a simple village, a scatter of stone cottages, a church spire leaning slightly against the wind, and a library built of red granite that looked far too grand for the people who used it. They said a laird's widow had funded it, a woman who loved words more than company, and who filled its shelves with anything that spoke of oceans, floods, and forgotten gods. But the world above Kilmara changed, and the men in uniforms came with blueprints and promises. They spoke of progress, of dams and turbines, and new power for a growing country. And so, one by one, the villagers were told to pack what they could carry and leave what they could not. The river that once fed Kilmara's crops was redirected, its veins rerouted into a wall of stone and steel. And when the floodgates opened, the water crept in quietly, like an uninvited guest that did not need to knock. In the final weeks before the drowning, the librarian, Loch Morven, refused to leave. She was not young, but her hands were steady and her eyes unblinking. When the engineers came to escort her, she simply smiled and said, "Books remember better than people do. Someone should stay to turn the last page." The men left her there, muttering of madness and age, but a few of them would never forget the way she stood at the door of that red library, watching the valley fill. The water came first as puddles, then ponds, then an inland sea. And through it all, she catalogued the sound, the groaning of foundations, the slow sigh of roots as trees surrendered their grip, the whisper of pages as damp fingers of fog slipped through cracks in the walls. By the time the water reached the library steps, her reflection had grown thin and uncertain. She saw herself in it, not as she was, but as if she were already beneath it, looking up from below. Still, she stayed. The villagers, those who'd moved to higher ground, would stand on the ridges at dusk and listen. They said they could still hear her voice, not weeping, not praying, reading from some book none could recall her owning, a language that rolled like tides, Old Gaelic perhaps, or Latin, or something older still. The sound carried strangely over the water, warped by wind and reflection. Some swore they could hear the turning of pages even after she was gone. And then, one morning, a mist rose and did not lift. When it finally cleared, Kilmara was gone. The steeple, the rooftops, the red library, all swallowed beneath the glass of the newly christened Loch Morven. Years passed, decades. The loch grew calm and respected, its surface mirroring the sky with polite indifference. Children born after the flood would hear only fragments, stories told by grandparents who remembered the scent of wet paper and the way the valley had once echoed with bells. Yet, on certain nights, when the moon was full and fog sat low on the water, fishermen swore they could see a faint glow beneath the surface. Not a reflection, a light from below. They'd lean from their boats, peering into the depths, and see what looked like windows, tall, arched, golden, and, if the lake was still, they could hear it again. The slow, impossible sound of a page turning underwater. No one believed the fishermen, of course, not truly, but a few curious souls tried lowering nets or cameras into the loch. The nets returned shredded, slick with dark silt. The cameras recorded only murk and pressure, and sometimes something else. An image, fleeting and pale, like a face pressed against glass. One diver described it as a reflection where no surface should exist. He never dove again. In the archives of the Edinburgh Historical Society, there remains one curious letter, unsigned, dated 1829, a year after the dam was completed. It was addressed to an unnamed keeper of records and written in a looping, watery script. The ink had run so badly that only fragments were legible. Do not let them raise it again. The shelves breathe now. It reads itself. The water remembers. And at the bottom, smeared but visible, the final line, I am still here. The catalog is not complete. 100 years later, that letter would find its way into the hands of Dr. Isla Wren, marine archaeologist and historian of drowned settlements. It was folded between a ledger of forgotten flood records and a torn map of the Kilmara Valley. When she touched it, she felt a faint grit between her fingertips. Not dust, but something slick. Isla had always been drawn to water, not for sport or leisure, but for the strange quiet of it, the way it consumed sound, how it slowed the pulse, how it seemed to erase the distance between thought and dream. When she was a child, her mother had nearly drowned. Isla had been there, had seen her body pulled from the riverbank, pale and silent. Ever since, the water had been both comfort and threat, a mirror she could not stop looking into. So when the opportunity came to lead a sanctioned dive into Loch Morven, to locate and digitally reconstruct the sunken ruins of Kilmara, she did not hesitate. Others saw ruins. She saw an echo, a conversation left unfinished. In her first descent plan, she circled one particular location repeatedly, the center of the old village, marked Morven Library. The coordinates aligned with one of the sonar readings that had returned a faint electromagnetic pulse, even after centuries underwater. When asked by her supervisor why she was so focused on that site, Isla only smiled faintly and said, "Because sometimes books call you before you find them." That night, as she prepared her equipment in the research cabin overlooking the loch, fog rolled in across the water, not the thin, playful kind, but a heavy white cloth that swallowed sound and light alike. Through the window, the surface of Loch Morven looked solid, like marble. No ripples, no wind, only the faintest shimmer deep beneath, far down, like a candle flickering through glass. She thought of the old letter, still damp. She thought of the words she'd barely made out. And as she turned off the lights, letting the hum of her equipment fill the silence, she whispered to herself, half in jest, half in awe, "Tomorrow I'll visit the library." And from the water below, unseen in the dark, a bubble rose, breaking the surface with a sound like a breath released too late. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. The diver. The morning arrived without sunlight. Mist draped itself across Loch Morven like a sheet, heavy and silent. From the cabin window, Isla Wren could see only the vague outline of the floating dock, its shape dissolving into the white veil that smothered the loch. The world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, her equipment waited rows of polished metal tanks, cameras sealed in glass housings, and a diving suit folded neatly like an empty skin. She'd done hundreds of dives in her career, from the flooded cellars of Venice to the drowned citadels off the coast of Crete. Yet this one felt different. She could not say why, only that the silence pressed harder here. It wasn't the silence of absence, but of listening, as though something below awaited her descent. Her research assistant, Tom, entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. His voice broke the stillness. Visibility's about 15 feet, maybe less. Sensors say it's calm below 30 meters. Ela nodded, wrapping her hands around the cup for warmth. That's deep enough to reach the old foundations. We start there. Tom hesitated. You sure about that spot? You've marked it 6 times. She smiled faintly. Old habits. I always double-check my ghosts. They loaded the small boat with deliberate precision. The fog clung to their clothes as they pushed off, engines barely humming. Loch Morven stretched around them like a sleeping animal, vast, opaque, timeless. Somewhere beneath that glassy expanse lay the ruins of Kilmara, the library, the village square, the submerged clock tower whose hands had stopped the moment the flood came. Isla checked her wrist monitor, reading out numbers to calm herself. Oxygen pressure, tank temperature, descent rate, the familiar rhythm of control. But beneath it, something restless moved. It was not fear. It was memory, brushing against the edges of her thoughts. The image of her mother's pale hand reaching through murky water. The flash of sun above. The taste of salt and grief. She closed her eyes, breathed once, twice. Steady, she whispered. When they reached the central coordinates, Tom dropped the anchor. The echoing splash disappeared almost instantly. Even sound felt swallowed here. He helped her strap on the rebreather. The mask sealed against her face with a soft hiss, and for a moment, Ila's reflection looked back at her, featureless, anonymous, already half gone. You've got 40 minutes before I call you up, Tom said, checking the instruments. If you see anything unstable, abort. Understood. Her voice sounded smaller inside the helmet, as though it had to travel farther to reach her own ears. She sat on the edge of the boat, her fins dangling over still water. Beneath her, the loch looked like a mirror made of smoke. And then she let herself fall forward. The water took her with slow hands. Pressure built gently against her chest and ears as the world above shrank into blur. Bubbles rose like ghostly fingers. The color drained from everything, green to gray, gray to black. At 20 meters, she saw the faint outline of stone, the top of a chimney, a roof ridge, the suggestion of streets swallowed whole. Kilmara. It lay there as though dreaming, its buildings softened by algae, its windows dark mouths half buried in silt. Her flashlight beam caught movement, a shoal of tiny silver fish scattering through door frames like whispers fleeing the light. She moved deeper, her breath steady, the sound rhythmic and comforting in her ears. Each exhale formed a silver thread that wound its way upward, toward a sky she could no longer see. Her eyes scanned for the coordinates marked on her digital display. 56, 1204N, 441, 59W. The center of what was once Kilmara's village square. As she approached, a shape emerged, a facade of red stone, arches intact, a carved symbol above the doorway half covered in silt. The library. Its doors stood slightly open, not shattered, not forced, simply ajar, as if someone had left in haste but expected to return. Isla paused outside, adjusting her light. The beam revealed a line of lettering carved above the arch. For those who seek, may knowledge grant breath. The words rippled faintly, distorted by water. She felt her pulse quicken, not in fear, but in recognition. Those words had been in the letter she found in the Edinburgh archive. She swam closer, brushing away a strand of lakeweed, and the stone beneath her fingertips felt strangely warm, pulsing ever so slightly. She withdrew her hand. The warmth lingered on her glove. Inside, the water was clearer. Particles hung in the stillness like dust caught in sunlight. The main hall stretched before her, perfectly preserved shelves upon shelves, each lined with books, sealed in thin layers of algae and time. Some floated weightless, tethered by the faintest threads of cobwebbed roots. It should have been impossible. Paper disintegrates in water, yet these volumes remained intact, their spines glinting faintly in her light. She drifted closer to one, its title still legible beneath the film of years, On the Nature of Rivers. Another, Hydrology and Spirit, and another, smaller one bound in pale leather without a title. When she brushed her glove against it, a single bubble escaped from the pages, as though the book had exhaled. Her radio crackled faintly. Tom's voice came through, distorted visibilities dropping. "You reading me? Still here," she replied. "Inside the main structure, it's intact." His voice flickered, then vanished into static. For a long moment, only her own breathing filled her ears, deep, slow, measured. She turned her light across the far wall. Something shimmered. A faint, pulsing glow emanated from a doorway at the rear of the library. It was soft, rhythmic, like candlelight seen through water. She hesitated, then began to swim toward it. The passage narrowed. Shelves gave way to stone corridors, lined with murals, hand-painted waves, open eyes, figures carrying books into the sea. At the end stood a sealed room, its window intact. Inside, suspended like a relic in a museum case, floated a table. Upon it lay a single book, untethered, untouched by decay. Its cover was deep black, with no title. Yet as she approached, letters began to rise across it, pale at first, then gleaming with slow certainty. "The ones who still breathe." Isla froze. The title pulsed faintly, as if alive. Her camera feed flickered a bloom of static and light. The pressure gauge on her wrist stuttered, the needle trembling. And from somewhere in the darkness behind her, she heard it, a faint rustling sound, unmistakable even here, the turning of a page. She turned her head slowly, light sweeping the shelves. Nothing moved, only shadows, wavering like thoughts. The sound came again, closer this time, soft, deliberate. She exhaled, bubbles spiraling upward like escaping words. Her heartbeat quickened. "Tom," she whispered into the mic, "I think there's current movement. Maybe sediment shifting." No reply. Her signal was gone. Something brushed her shoulder. She spun, hand instinctively rising to steady herself. But nothing was there. Only a trail of tiny air bubbles moving past her, not upward, but sideways, as if following an unseen current through the library. They traced a line toward the table, toward the book. She drifted closer, her gloved hand trembling slightly as she reached for it. The cover felt soft, yielding, not like leather, but like skin. The light from her torch trembled as she lifted it gently from the table. It was heavier than it should have been, pulsing faintly against her palm. And as she tilted it toward her, the first drop of ink slipped from its corner, curling like smoke through the water. It moved toward her mask, slow and graceful, spelling shapes she almost understood. Letters formed, curling, alive. "You are late for your reading." Her breath caught. She tried to speak, but the regulator hissed dryly. The oxygen gauge flickered, 0. Her chest tightened. She reached for the emergency valve, twisting hard. Nothing. The dial spun uselessly, fogging with black streaks. The ink on the book pulsed brighter, swirling in the water before her. It coiled around her wrist, her arms, her mask like veins, like script, her vision blurred. Through the haze, she thought she saw movement beyond the window. The faint outline of a woman standing on the other side of the glass, hair drifting weightless, a candle in one hand, and eyes that gleamed with reflection. The librarian eyelid Morven as Isla's body convulsed. The last bubbles rose from her lips, not clear, but dark. The book's pages fluttered open on their own, each turning as if caught in an invisible current. From them poured ink like breath, ink like smoke, and the water filled with whispering, words spoken in no language that should exist, murmuring through her dying heartbeat, soft and patient and endless. Above the lock, the surface broke with a single pop, a small bubble rising from the depths and bursting into mist. The fog swirled once, as though stirred by something unseen, then fell still again. Only the faintest ripple remained, as if a page had just been turned far below. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Below the glass surface, the surface of Loch Morven remained motionless long after the last ripple faded. Fog hung over the water like the veil of a sleeping thing. The small research boat drifted slowly, tethered by its own silence. Tom checked his monitor for the 5th time. No signal. Isla's transponder had vanished 10 minutes ago. Not lost, not weak, simply gone. The screen displayed nothing but a gray pulse where her ID had once glowed. He tapped the screen again. Static. He called through the radio. "Isla copy. You're at 38 minutes. Response." No answer. Only the whisper of wind moving across the lake's skin. He frowned. adjusting the receiver. The sonar picked up something faint, a rhythmic sound, almost like tapping. He leaned closer. 3 taps, a pause, then 2. It almost sounded like breathing. The hairs rose along his arms. He checked the air compressor, the lines, the reserve tank. Everything was working perfectly. There was no reason she shouldn't have resurfaced. He swallowed hard, fighting the weight pressing against his chest. Not panic, but the slow recognition that the loch itself was watching him. "Isla, please, confirm," he said again, his voice cracking. "I'll lower a rescue line." Silence. Then, faintly, a sound emerged through the static. A whisper, not words, not fully, but her voice. "Tom, stay. Don't come down." And then, a low, dragging noise, as though something heavy had brushed against the microphone. Tom froze. "Ela." No reply, only the faint, wet hiss of bubbles. Then, abruptly, the sound of pages turning. The receiver shrieked with distortion. Tom ripped off his headset. For a brief moment, his reflection shimmered on the dark water, fractured, multiplied. He caught movement beneath the surface, a shadow, large, slow, circular. He stumbled backward. His boot hit the oxygen tank, sending it rolling. The hiss of escaping air cut through the silence, loud and terrible. Tom's breath trembled as he crouched, peering into the mist-shrouded loch. Something was rising, not quickly, not violently, but deliberately, as though aware of him. A shape broke the surface, pale, curved, reflective. At first he thought it was a rock. Then the surface rippled, and he saw what it truly was, the corner of a book. Enormous, pages soaked but intact, its cover glinting with a faint pulse of light. Water ran from its spine like veins. Tom stepped closer, hands shaking. The book floated for a moment, then began to sink again, as if pulled gently by unseen hands. He reached out instinctively. His fingertips brushed the surface. The instant he touched it, the world went silent. No wind, no sound, no motion. The fog froze in midair, each droplet suspended like glass beads. And through that stillness came a voice. The late arrivals are always the loudest. Tom jerked his hand back, eyes wide. The book was gone. The fog stirred again, moving as if exhaling after holding its breath. The voice lingered, echoing beneath his skull, calm, female, almost kind. He didn't move for a full minute. Then, trembling, he activated the submersible camera drone. The drone descended into the loch, its light cutting through the dark in pale arcs. He watched through the monitor, sediment clouds, beams of forgotten structures, remnants of rooftops. Then, movement, a flicker, not fish, not debris, a figure drifting slowly past the lens. Tom leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass. The figure's hair flowed like ink, its face turned away. But when it turned, it wasn't Isla. It was older, paler, eyes faintly luminous, holding something against its chest. A book, the image blurred with static. Then the drone's camera died. Hours later, rescue divers arrived from the mainland. They found nothing. No body, no camera, no trace of Isla Wren. Only her dive slate caught on a branch 15 meters down. The last line she had written before it faded into blank water was short, hesitant, almost childlike. The books are breathing. 4 weeks later, rain fell in slow, diagonal strokes against the glass walls of the Aberdeen Maritime Archive. Dr. Evelyn Calder, marine historian and field supervisor, reviewed the report with narrowed eyes. Equipment failed, probable hypoxia. No remains recovered, she read aloud. That's it. After 6 years of research funding, Tom sat opposite her, pale, unshaven. I'm telling you, that's not what happened, he said quietly. She was alive down there. I heard her, Evelyn sighed. People hear echoes in deep water. The mind, it wasn't an echo. He reached into his bag and slid a small, waterproof case across the table. Inside, sealed in transparent gel, was Isla's data recorder. The technician had said it was corrupted, but Tom had found one file still intact. A 30-second audio clip recorded seconds before her signal vanished. Evelyn hesitated, then pressed play. At first, only water sounds, muffled breaths, soft current hums. Then, faintly, "You are late for your reading." Evelyn frowned. Is that her? Tom shook his head. Listen closer. The voice repeated the sentence, but each time it changed tone, pitch, rhythm, as though different mouths were trying to say it. And in the background, another sound grew clearer, pages turning, hundreds of them then, a heartbeat. The clip ended with a sharp intake of air. Evelyn leaned back, slowly. Could be tampering. Tom's voice was barely audible. Or a call. 4 weeks after, he dreamed of the loch, of pressure pressing inward from all sides, of books opening in the dark. He'd wake, gasping, his throat dry, the taste of lake water lingering like memory, and each morning his bedroom mirror was fogged. No matter how he wiped it, faint words would appear. We still breathe. 6 months later, by spring, Loch Morven was closed to divers. Official reason: environmental instability. Unofficially, too many missing. 3 locals vanished while fishing near the central basin. One left his camera on. The footage, recovered from his phone, showed him smiling, turning toward the water and whispering something before stepping in. No splash, no struggle, just stillness. When investigators enhanced the audio, they found a faint whisper under his voice, a woman saying, "Page 37. Evelyn couldn't let it go. She reopened the file under private study, hiring a deep-water retrieval team. Among them Tom, quieter, now thinner, but determined. Their plan was simple: descend through the same coordinates, record everything, retrieve what remained of Isla's station. The day was clear when they arrived. No fog, no wind. The lake looked harmless, ordinary, even beautiful. But beauty is just a mask for memory. They descended one by one into the water. At 15 meters, the light began to change. Not dimmer, just different, like sunlight filtered through smoke. Tom adjusted his torch. The beam wavered, refracted by something that wasn't water. He saw faint outlines below the rooftops, the streets, Kilmara, then the library. It stood as Isla had described it, doors half open, shelves intact. He felt his breath quicken. "Evelyn, you seeing this?" Her voice came through clearly. "Affirmative. Maintain depth. Don't enter yet." But he was already drifting forward. Something was calling. The water grew still as glass. Through the door, he saw movement, not human, not fish, pages, hundreds of them, swirling in slow spirals, forming shapes, rooms, faces, the suggestion of hands. He reached out instinctively. The moment his fingers crossed the threshold, the water shifted, the temperature dropped, pressure tightened, and all at once the pages stopped. Every single one turned toward him. He realized, with a strange calm, that they weren't loose papers, they were eyes, each one looking through him. He tried to move, but his limbs were heavy. From behind, he heard Evelyn shouting, her voice distant, distorted, fading. Then came the sound he remembered, pages turning, slow and deliberate. A shape moved within them, pale hair floating in slow waves. Eyelid Morven, the librarian. Her face was serene, eyes black with ink. She raised her hand, pointing toward him, and a voice filled his helmet. "You're late too." The library pulsed. Light spilled from the shelves, flooding upward like breath. The water thickened, turning black. Tom screamed, bubbles streaming past his mask. But they weren't bubbles. They were letters, thousands of them, swirling, merging, forming sentences that wrapped around him. "We still breathe. We still read. You still write." His vision went white. Above, Evelyn's camera feed went blank. Later, when the authorities retrieved what was left of the team, they found only Evelyn, unconscious, adrift in the rescue boat. When she woke, she couldn't speak for hours. When she finally did, her first words were, "It's not a lake, it's a memory." End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The librarian's wake. Sound low, distant current. Water moving beneath weight. A single bell tolls underwater, once, softly, then silence. For days after the incident, Evelyn didn't speak. Doctors said trauma, shock, oxygen deprivation, but she knew better. The sound still rang inside her skull. The slow rhythm of pages turning. It came in waves, faint as heartbeat, always from the left ear. When she closed her eyes, she saw light through water. When she opened them, she saw letters dancing behind glass. The hospital room was white and humming, machines blinking beside her. But at night, when the hum softened, she could hear something beneath it, a faint whispering, like dozens of people reading at once in different languages. No one else heard it. She stopped sleeping, and one evening, in a flicker of moonlight across her foretube, she noticed droplets of ink gathering in the clear fluid. They rose, one by one, forming a faint sentence inside the tube. We still breathe. 2 weeks later, Evelyn left the hospital. No press, no farewell. She drove north through the mist until the road narrowed to a single lane between heather fields. At the end of it lay Morven village, a place rebuilt after the dam decades ago. Neat cottages, sheep, school, a small post office, and above it all, watching silently the still gray water of Loch Morven. The villagers avoided it. They called it the quiet mirror. Children were told never to throw stones in, for the lake does not like being disturbed. When Evelyn asked for records of the old village Kilmara, she was met with polite unease. The postmaster, an elderly man with clouded eyes, said simply, "Some memories don't dry, lass. Let the lake keep its stories." But that only deepened her resolve. She rented a room overlooking the water, an old inn with uneven floors and wallpaper that smelled faintly of mildew. From her window, she could see the loch stretch endlessly into mist. That night, she set her recorder on the table. She pressed play on Isla's final dive audio. Water. Breathing the phrase, "You are late for your reading." But this time, something new. After the voice faded, a second sound emerged, faint and distorted, like a door creaking underwater. Then a man's voice, Tom's, gasping, then silence. At the very end, just before the file ended, she heard 3 quiet knocks, not in the recording, in her room. She turned slowly toward the door. No one, but on the wall opposite. She leaned closer. It wasn't random. It was writing. Water droplets, forming letters, sliding down the paint. "Loch Morven welcomes you." Her breath caught. The name, the librarian's name. She hadn't spoken it aloud. The droplets quivered, merging into new words. "She kept your book ready." Evelyn stepped back, heart pounding. The letters slowly ran together, melting into the wallpaper, until nothing remained but dampness. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she walked to the lake's edge. Mist lay thick, rippling faintly with breath of morning wind. She could smell the metallic temps of water, heavy with cold. Something broke the surface, faintly. A ripple. She froze. It was a book, bobbing gently, its cover swollen with moisture, its pages fluttering, though there was no wind. Evelyn hesitated, then reached down with a trembling hand. The book was heavier than it looked, its leather soft as skin. Across the front was an inscription, hand-tooled in faded gold, "The Librarian's Wake." She opened it. Inside, dry pages, perfectly preserved. but the first sentence made her blood chill. Evelyn Calder opened the book at dawn by the shore of Loch Morven. Her hand trembled. She turned the page. Behind her, the water began to rise. She spun around. The lake was calm, but a ring of ripples was moving outward, slow and deliberate, as though something just below the surface had stirred, and beneath the ripples, bubbles, dozens of them. She stared, paralyzed. The pages of the book began to turn on their own, flapping wetly, each one faster, faster, until the sound became a soft, mechanical heartbeat. Evelyn dropped it and stumbled backward. The book fell open at the center, and from its spine, a thin ribbon of black liquid rose into the air like smoke. It didn't fall back. It drifted toward her. She stumbled, backing into the reeds. The black ribbon stretched, shimmered, and then split, forming letters in midair. "You are next to shelve." And with that, it sank into the soil and vanished. Evelyn stood there long after the fog began to thin, her breath visible, her heart beat louder than the wind. At last, she whispered to herself, "This isn't over." And in the distance, from beneath the lake, a page turned. That evening, Evelyn found herself drawn to the inn cellar. The owner had told her it was flooded long ago, sealed after the dam was built. But as she passed the stairwell, she noticed something, a faint trickle of water seeping through the cracks. The sound was rhythmic, almost like breathing. She knelt, pressing her ear to the wood. A voice, faint, almost inside her skull, whispered from beneath, "Shelves below, readers wait." She stumbled back, knocking over a lantern. The flame flickered, guttered, then extinguished. When she relit it, she saw that the floorboards had swollen, and through them, all small letters were rising in the water, leaking through. She could see them forming beneath her boots. Chapter 5. Her mouth went dry. The innkeeper found her minutes later, standing still, the lantern trembling in her hands. "Miss Calder, are you all right?" She forced a smile. "Yes," she lied, "just listening." That night, she began her notes again, this time by hand, not on her laptop. Ink felt safer. She wrote, "The books are alive. The lake is their body. The shelves are built from memory." She paused, then added, "Every reader who descends is written into the collection." She set the pen down, her hand shaking. Then she noticed something strange. The page beneath her words wasn't white. It was faintly translucent, and through it, from below, other words appeared, not hers. "Your next line is..." She turned to see the candle go out. Her eyes widened. The candle flickered once, then died. In the darkness, the lake whispered against the windows. Not waves, not weather, whispers, reading. Dozens of voices murmuring in harmony, every syllable slow and reverent, like prayer, like pages turning underwater. Evelyn closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she wasn't in the inn. She was standing knee-deep in cold, dark water, all around her shelves. Miles of them, vanishing into shadow, books floating just above their spines as if held by unseen hands. And at the far end, a desk. A woman sat there, her back turned. Evelyn took one trembling step forward. The woman looked up from her book. Her hair drifted like seaweed, her face pale as salt. Her eyes opened, deep, empty sockets filled with ink. "Welcome home, Miss Calder," she said. "Your reading has just begun." End of chapter 4. The loch was calmer now, unnervingly so. No wind skimming across its surface, no whisper from the reeds, no sound of distant birds or the sigh of trees. It was as though the water itself was holding its breath, waiting. Mara stood on the dock at dawn, her reflection framed by a mist that never lifted. Her dive gear hung ready beside her, slick with dew. For days she had replayed the voice in her dreams. "You are late for your reading." The tone was never angry, merely patient. It was the patience of something that had all the time in the world. She had tried to ignore it, tried to stay away, but she knew she would return, just as the tide must rise, just as the lake could not help but remember. And so she readied herself once more. The first plunge into the loch's cold mouth was a shock to the body, like diving into forgotten time. The silt drifted slowly in the beam of her torch, flakes of lost centuries swirling like dust motes in the gloom. She passed the drowned trees again, their skeletal branches stretched toward her like the hands of penitents begging for confession. Below her, the faint glow pulsed the heartbeat of the library. The descent felt slower this time, the weight of the water heavier, as though it were aware of her, pulling, testing, tasting. Her oxygen hissed rhythmically, yet between each breath she thought she heard something else, the faint turn of a page. When the ruins appeared, she realized the light had changed. It wasn't the sterile white of her torch anymore. The glow emanated from the shelves themselves, rows upon rows of books, still floating upright, bound by some invisible current. And within that spectral illumination, words drifted like jellyfish, paragraphs moving between the covers, reshaping themselves when unseen eyes looked away. Mara swam closer, heart hammering. The title she had seen before, "The Ones Who Still Breathe," lay where she had left it. But beside it now were two more volumes. One bore her own name, etched faintly into the waterlogged spine. The other was open, its pages fluttering as though from the soft stir of her breath. She reached for it, but before her fingers could touch, her torch flickered out. Darkness swallowed everything. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, only her pulse echoing in her ears. Then the soft, unmistakable sound of breathing began. It wasn't hers. Something was breathing through the regulator, slow, steady inhalations that matched her rhythm. She froze, staring into the black, waiting for a shape to emerge. Her hand found the backup light, trembling. When she clicked it on, the water around her shimmered with faint ripples, as if someone had just moved past her. A shadow hovered near the shelves, tall, robed, its outline faint but deliberate. The water around it seemed clearer, like a bubble of air refusing to mix with the lake. Its face was obscured by a mask of glass that caught her light, reflecting her own terrified expression. It raised one hand slowly and gestured toward the open book. Mara hesitated, but curiosity, that fatal sickness of all seekers, overcame her. She drifted forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the page. Immediately, the ink bled upward, spreading through the water like smoke. Words formed in front of her eyes, not written, but suspended, as if the lake itself was whispering them into being. Every reader must breathe their own story. The air is yours no longer. Her lungs tightened, panic struck. She exhaled, bubbles racing upward, but no new air came. Her chest convulsed as her oxygen feed went dead. The pressure crushed inward like a closing fist. In the flickering light, the robed figure leaned closer. Behind the glass mask, a single eye gleamed, not cruel, not kind, but ancient. It reached out and touched her wrist. The contact was gentle. Then, impossibly, the regulator hummed back to life. Air flooded her lungs, searing and cold. Mara gasped and kicked away, her mind a storm of terror. The figure didn't follow. It merely pointed upward and then toward the shelves, where one book had begun to glow brighter than the rest. Its title blurred, shifting until it spelled the diver's chapter, and beneath it, written in ink the color of old blood, was a new line: breathe, and the story continues. Mara bolted toward the surface. The water grew colder, heavier with each movement, as though it resisted her escape. Her torch fell from her hand, sinking slowly into the murk below, its light swallowed by the waiting dark. When she broke the surface, gasping, the mist was thick as milk. The dock was gone, or perhaps hidden. Around her, the loch stretched endlessly in every direction. She turned, disoriented, shivering. Her boat, too, had vanished. Then, faintly, she heard it from somewhere deep below, the sound of pages turning, followed by a sigh that rippled through the water. And in that sigh, she heard her own name. That night, when the local fisherman, old Callum, rose before dawn to check his nets, he noticed something strange floating near the reeds. It wasn't a fish or a tangle of weed. It was a single sheet of vellum, perfectly dry, despite the mist. Curiosity made him lift it. On the page was a sketch, a map of the loch, drawn with exquisite precision. Every ridge, every hidden bend of the drowned village below. But at the center, near where the library lay, was a small mark in red ink, a single word, circled breath. Callum frowned. As he turned the page over, he felt something warm against his fingers. On the reverse side, faint but visible, were the impressions of fingerprints, delicate, recent, and when he glanced back toward the lake, he could swear he saw someone standing just beneath the surface, watching him through the mist, her hair drifting like ink in the current, her eyes open and patient. He blinked once, twice, and she was gone. Only ripples remained. But when he returned home, and his wife asked where he'd been so long, he could not answer, for in the back of his throat he could still taste the loch, cold, heavy, and ink-black. The library was awake now. It knew the diver's breath. It had found the next reader. And below, in the drowned manor's forgotten hall, the pages began to turn once more, each word written with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Chapter 5. The memory that floated after her second descent. Mara could not tell if she had truly returned to the surface, or if she had only risen into another layer of the same dream. The light was wrong. It had the thin, colorless pallor of faded film, the kind that forgets how to hold warmth. The village above the loch was silent. Even the gulls, usually shrieking near the docks, had vanished. Her clothes, left to dry by the cabin's stove, still dripped faintly, though she hadn't stepped near the water since dawn. The drops hit the floorboards like whispers, steady, rhythmic. Breathe, and the story continues. The words returned again and again. She could almost hear them pulsing behind her ears, threaded through each breath she took. When she looked at the mirror above the sink, she startled. Her reflection seemed delayed. It blinked a moment after she did, and behind her shoulder, faintly, the surface shimmered, as if submerged glass separated her from herself. She turned away. The kettle had begun to rattle, though she hadn't lit the stove. A single bubble formed at its rim and popped with a sound like a page turning. By noon, the mist thickened again. Mara stepped outside, the taste of iron heavy in her mouth. Near the dock, the waterline had risen just a few inches, but enough to drown the lower planks. Floating there was a fragment of what looked like parchment. It drifted lazily, as if reluctant to leave the depths behind. When she drew it out with her net, the paper came free with a sound like a gasp. It was thicker than normal paper, soft, with fine pores, almost like skin. Her stomach tightened. Ink coiled across its surface, still wet, forming words before her eyes. Chapter 2. The surface breathes. Her fingers went numb. The loch had begun to write. The realization made her knees weaken. She stumbled back into the cabin and spread the page beneath a lamp. The ink was moving again, letters shifting into tiny sketches, outlines of a face, a house, then the interior of a library. Not underwater, not ruined. This library was whole, alive, filled with candles, their light trembling on dark wood and glass globes of water. People moved among the aisles, drowned people. Their hair floated around them like black seaweed, yet their feet never touched the ground. They turned pages that never tore, reading with eyes white and hollow. Mara's breath caught. The image changed again. One of the figures turned its head, and she saw her own face staring back. She dropped the parchment, trembling. The lamp flickered violently, then went out. From outside, the loch groaned, a deep, wet sound, wood cracking, water moving against old foundations. She ran to the window. The mist parted just enough for her to see something breaking the surface near the center of the lake. A roof, stone, covered in moss, rising slowly as though the loch were exhaling. Water spilled down its sides in shimmering cascades. The drowned village of Kilmara was surfacing. For a moment, her fear wavered, overcome by awe. The loch wasn't just a grave, it was remembering itself. Mara's journal that night was a mess of sketches and half-written notes. She wrote until her hands ached. If the loch remembers, does it dream? Why can I breathe there? The air feels alive, like lungs. There were others. I saw them reading. The water didn't drown them. It preserved them. The candle guttered as she scribbled the last line. Then, without warning, the flame bent sideways toward the window. Outside, the lake gleamed faintly again. But now there were lights moving on it. At first, she thought they were reflections, lanterns from a passing boat. But they were too slow, too steady. Each light floated alone, bobbing softly like will-o'-the-wisps. And beneath each, she could make out a shape, a figure, waist-deep in the water, holding a book. One turned its head. Even across the mist, she could tell it had no eyes, only the smooth curve of flesh where sockets should have been. Still, she felt its gaze, a tug behind her sternum. Her hand reached out to the window on its own. For an instant, her fingers touched the cold glass, and she swore she felt the water press back. When she woke the next morning, the lights were gone, but the waterline had climbed another foot, creeping up the steps of her cabin. And outside, tangled in the reeds, she found a single object, a key, long and green with patina. Attached to it, by a decayed ribbon, was a brass tag. She wiped the silt away to reveal one word engraved deep and clear: library. Mara's pulse quickened. The drowned manor had doors still locked. The key was waiting. By dusk, she was back in her wetsuit, the weight of the key heavy in her vest. She slipped once more beneath the surface, the lock closing over her like velvet. The deeper she went, the louder the sound became, pages turning, slow and patient. As she descended past the ruins of the village, she saw something new, faint trails of air rising from the stones, like the place itself was exhaling. And then, from within the silted shadows, the library emerged, clearer now, sharper in its edges, as if rebuilding itself from memory. She swam toward the great door. The same carved crest waited there, an open book beneath waves, the symbol of Kilmara's lost scholars. The key slid easily into the lock, turning with a click that echoed like thunder underwater. The door opened outward, and a rush of air burst forth, real air. Her gauges spun wildly, registering impossible readings. She removed her regulator cautiously, inhaling. The air was old, dry, and faintly perfumed with salt and paper. Inside, the library was vast, impossibly larger than it could have been. Shelves spiraled upward into blackness. The floor was not stone, but rippling water, no deeper than her ankles. Every step sent faint circles outward, disturbing the reflections of endless rows of books. And then she heard them again, the readers, dozens of them, moving between shelves, their shapes vague but human. They turned pages, murmuring softly, the sound of their voices blending into a low-tide hum. Mara called out, "Who are you?" Several heads turned in unison. One figure approached. Its robe drifted behind it like mist. The face was hidden by a porcelain mask, cracked down the center. When it spoke, the sound came not from its mouth, but from the water itself. "We are what remains unread." The shelves around her trembled, a low groan filling the air. Books began to slide free, opening mid-air, pages fluttering like wings. "Every breath brings another story," the voice continued. "And now you have brought your own." Mara felt the surface beneath her ripple violently. She looked down. Words were forming on the water, letters glowing like phosphorescence. They spelled her name. Then a line appeared beneath it, the diver's memory, Chapter 3. The masked figure leaned closer. Behind the crack, she saw a flicker of movement, a living eye. "Welcome back, Mara," it whispered. "The lock remembers you." She would not remember surfacing. She would not remember swimming back or collapsing beside her cabin. But she would remember the dream that followed. A room of endless shelves, water dripping from the ceiling like falling hours. A book pulsing like a heart in her hands. Her reflection staring from its cover, mouth moving silently. And beneath it all, the constant soft sound of pages turning, as though the lock itself was gently reading her life aloud. Chapter 6. The House That Rose from the Deep. The following evening, the sky bled into the water. A sunset of rust and violets spread across the loch's surface, so still that it looked like molten glass. Mara sat on the warped steps of her cabin, half believing she had imagined everything. Yet the brass key still lay in her palm, cool and heavy. Her wetsuit hung beside her, its folds smelling faintly of salt and ink. The loch sighed, as if answering her doubt. For a moment, she thought she saw the tip of a spire breaching the surface. A ripple spread outward, slow, deliberate, almost like breath. It came again, another shape rising, a roof gable, then the hint of a chimney. The drowned man was surfacing. At first, the villagers thought it was an illusion of light. Kilmara's remnants had haunted them for decades, stories half-remembered by children. But now, fishermen refused to sail. They said their oars touched rooftops. Some even claimed they could hear bells beneath the waves, ringing faintly through the mist. By morning, Mara stood at the shoreline, staring at the emerging shape. Moss-covered stones dripped with cold light, a flight of marble steps, slick with algae, climbed from the water into fog. And somewhere inside, though she couldn't see it, she knew the library waited. She pressed her hand to her chest. The key throbbed faintly against her ribs, as if alive. That night, she returned to the water. No gear this time. The loch was calm, inviting. She walked into it, each step heavy, each breath slower. The moon hung directly above her, a perfect reflection in the water. When it touched her ankles, it didn't break. The reflection opened. She sank through it as though stepping into another world. She landed in silence. The manor stood whole now, walls unbroken, candles burning behind glass, the air shimmering as though caught between dream and memory. Her bare feet touched cold marble, and the floor hummed under her weight. She recognized the entry hall from the sketches she had made, only now it was clean. The portraits gleamed, eyes moving subtly as she passed. At the end of the corridor waited the library doors. The symbol above them, once eroded, was whole again, a serpent eating its tail, encircling an open book. When she entered, the readers stopped, dozens of them, their heads turned in one motion, robes dripping with unseen water, pages in their hands trembling like breath. She whispered, "I came back." From the upper balcony, the masked figure she had met before leaned forward. Its voice drifted down, smooth and slow. "You never left." Mara stepped toward the central table, where a single book rested, bound in white leather, its surface pulsing faintly. Around it, ink stains spread outward like veins. "The lake remembers," the masked figure said again. But now the memory rises. The surface forgets what it has buried. The house returns to finish the story. The walls quivered. Water trickled down from the ceiling, pooling around her ankles. She tried to step back, but the floor had softened. Her feet sank slightly, as if the marble were breathing. "What are you?" she demanded. The echo of readers, the words that learned to think. As the figure descended, its mask cracked fully open, revealing nothing beneath, just darkness filled with moving symbols, letters drifting like eels. "You gave us breath," it said. "Now we return it." It placed a hand on the white book. The cover unfurled like flesh, revealing not paper, but translucent skin stretched over veins of ink. A faint heartbeat pulsed within. "Read," the figure commanded. Her lips parted before she could resist. The book's words bled upward, streaming into her mouth like smoke. Her lungs burned, yet she felt no pain, only weightless calm. In her mind, she saw images, the dam bursting, water swallowing houses, people clawing for air, then silence, a library filling with silt and ghosts, and beneath it all, a single voice, the librarians whispering through centuries, if they drown us, we'll write ourselves back. The ceiling cracked open. A column of water surged inward, carrying moonlight and debris. Shelves collapsed. Books exploded into clouds of ink. The masked figure raised its arms, triumphant, as the water spiraled upward, wrapping the room in black whirlpools. Mara screamed without sound. Then nothing. She awoke in her cabin, morning again. Her lungs ached. Her bed was soaked, the sheets heavy and cold. Outside, the loch glistened calmly, as though nothing had ever happened. She stumbled to the mirror. A faint mark ran across her chest, lines forming a pattern. She leaned closer, heart hammering. They weren't scars, they were letters. Tiny, perfect script in dark ink, forming a map. At its center, a word, Kilmara. That evening, the first tourists arrived to photograph the strange ruins emerging from the loch. None of them noticed the pale woman standing at the shore, whispering to herself. None of them saw how her reflection didn't match her movements. As the fog rolled in, the last fisherman swore he heard something below the water, not the sound of fish, nor of shifting stone. It was the sound of pages turning. Chapter 7, The Reading Room. Mara did not sleep that night. The fog hung low over Loch Morven, and the faint ripple of water against the dock sounded like whispered syllables, syllables that formed themselves into words, calling her name. The village was quiet, unnaturally quiet. Even the wind had stopped. The houses, the streets, the faint glow of lanterns from upstairs windows, all seemed paused, as if the world were holding its breath for something to emerge from the depths. By midnight, she could no longer resist the pull. The brass key burned against her palm. Her wetsuit waited by the cabin door, wet still from the last dive, but she did not need it this time. She walked into the loch barefoot, each step making ripples that spread across the water like tiny hands reaching toward the sky. The submerged manor loomed beneath the surface, now fully visible. The moonlight caught on its damp stone, revealing ornate carvings of open books, rising flames, and twisting serpents. Mara swam closer, each stroke deliberate, controlled, as if the loch itself were testing her determination. She entered through the grand doors, the brass key turning with the smooth certainty of inevitability. Inside, the reading room awaited. The reading room was vast beyond measure. The ceiling stretched high above, lost in shadow, while shelves spiraled infinitely in every direction. Water pooled lightly across the marble floor, carrying reflections that danced as though they were alive. Books hovered slightly above their shelves, turning slowly as if aware of her presence, and the readers were there. Dozens, hundreds, impossible to count. Each figure robed and pale, hair drifting as though underwater, eyes blank yet aware. They did not acknowledge her at first, merely continued their silent devotions to the words. At the center of the room, a desk floated on a thin layer of water. The book atop it glowed faintly. The diver's chapter. Mara approached. Her hands trembled, yet she was compelled to reach out. The instant her fingers brushed the leather, a wave of sensations slammed into her mind. Centuries of memory, drowning, breathing, reading, drowning again. The book opened on its own. Its pages were made not of paper, but of a fine, translucent membrane, veins of ink pulsing like tiny rivers of life. Words appeared, rearranging themselves into sentences she had not read before. Every reader leaves a mark. Every breath is recorded. Every step echoes through the library forever. A whisper curled through the room. It spoke from the air, from the water, from the walls. You belong here now. Mara's eyes scanned the shelves. Words shifted and reformed into her own story, her own name etched into multiple volumes. Each book held an iteration of her life, her memory, and what she had seen in the loch. She realized then that the library did not merely preserve knowledge, it collected lives. One of the robed readers floated toward her. Its mask was cracked, a single eye gleaming from the darkness beneath. It spoke in a voice that was everywhere and nowhere. You have entered the reading room. To leave, you must read. To read is to give yourself fully to the loch. To breathe is to surrender. Mara's heart raced. She tried to pull back, but the floor beneath her rippled, forming small waves that nudged her forward. Her reflection in the water below was already distorted, half her face, half the mask of the figure. Do not resist, it continued. Every reader is necessary. Every story must be completed. From the far end of the room, more volumes began to rise, forming a floating spiral that converged toward the central desk. The words themselves hissed like air escaping a submerged chest. Your memory is ours. Your breath is ours. Your life is now a story we keep. Mara could feel the pull of the words against her chest, her mind. Each breath she took was heavier, filled with the weight of the library itself. She tried to scream, but the sound was absorbed by the water pooled on the floor. And then she saw it, a page from the ones who still breathe, floating above the desk. Ink dripping downward like blood. The letters rearranged themselves before her eyes. Read, and you shall live. Pause, and you shall join us. Mara realized the truth. The library did not merely record the drowned. It recruited them. It demanded their attention, their will, their very essence. And the deeper she read, the the more the words took root inside her. Her memories, her fears, her hopes, her breath itself were being catalogued, folded into the pages. She opened the book fully, letting the words flow into her mind. Time became meaningless. The candlelight flickered, then vanished. The water around her rose gently, lapping at her knees, her waist, her chest, until she was floating lightly. The readers watched silently, their expressions blank, almost reverent. A single phrase began to echo in the room, whispered by all the drowned. "The next page is yours." Mara understood. She had become a part of the library, a living memory woven into the books. Yet the terror was tempered by a strange calm. The lock had claimed her, but it had also given her purpose. To resist was impossible. To yield was survival. Hours, days, perhaps weeks passed, she could not measure. The water beneath the marble floor glimmered faintly, reflecting infinite shells. The readers circled her now, their robes drifting like smoke, their eyes on the pages she held. Every page she turned brought a new life, a new memory, a new reader. The books pulsed, feeding on her presence. She realized then that she was not merely reading, she was writing, folding herself into the story with every thought, every inhalation. And as the first hints of dawn touched the lock outside, Mara whispered to herself, "I am here, I am reading, I am remembered." From the shadows of the reading room, the masked figure inclined its head, approving. "Welcome to eternity," it said. "You will never leave, and yet you will never be alone." Somewhere in the village, a bell tolled faintly, not from the church, but from the loch itself, resonating through the water, through the fog, through time. It was a bell that marked the beginning of a reading and the end of a life outside its pages. Mara turned another page. The words pulsed with heartbeat, and she felt herself drawn deeper, carried by the ink, the water, and the stories of all who had come before her. She exhaled, letting the library take her fully. The reading room had claimed another reader, and somewhere, far below the waterline, the pages continued to turn. Chapter 8. The Drowned Villagers. The water of Loch Morven was no longer a simple barrier between life and death. Mara had come to understand that now, each dive, each step into the submerged manor brought her closer to the memory of the village, the souls of Kilmara's drowned residents, weaving themselves into the fabric of the library. That morning, she awoke to find faint ripples brushing against her cabin's foundation. Her reflection in the water no longer mirrored her exactly. In the curve of her cheek, she could see the faint outline of someone else, a child, eyes wide, staring silently. She blinked, and the face vanished, but the chill remained. By noon, Mara had returned to the loch. She waded past the reeds, past the newly risen steps of the manor, until the grand doors opened silently before her. The library was waiting, calm yet expectant. Inside, the reading room had changed. More figures were present now, drifting among the shelves. Their faces were blurred, half-formed, like smoke caught in candlelight. Some stared at Mara directly. Some read their invisible books, oblivious to her presence. A voice, faint and quivering, emerged from the water, pooling at her feet. "Help us." Mara froze. The voice was thin, childlike, echoing from below the surface. She looked down. Shapes moved beneath the shallow water. Shadows, human in form, reaching upward, fingertips brushing the ripples. Their eyes were wide, pale, desperate. "Who are you?" she asked. "We were Kilmara," they whispered in chorus, overlapping voices. "We were lost when the dam fell. The library, it keeps us. We breathe, but we do not live. We read, but we do not turn pages." A small figure floated closer, its hair drifting like ink in the current. Its mouth opened silently, yet the words formed in Mara's mind. "You carry the key. You carry the breath. You can set us free." Mara looked at the brass key in her pocket. Its weight had grown heavier, more insistent, pulsing like a heartbeat. "How?" she asked, voice trembling. The figures began to drift around her, forming a circle. Pages from the floating books lifted, fluttering above their heads like wings. Words hung in the air, instructions, warnings, fragments of memory. "Read, write, remember," the child whispered. "But do not drown. If you falter, you join us." Mara swallowed hard. The water around her rippled. She realized then that the library did not merely preserve the drowned, it trapped them. Each villager, each reader, each diver who had ever touched the books had been folded into the pages. Their essence was ink and memory, recorded forever, unless someone actively navigated the labyrinth. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, as Mara floated among the shapes. She held the key, letting it guide her, letting it thrum in response to her thoughts. She approached one of the larger shelves. A book fell free, landing softly in the shallow water. Its cover glowed faintly, the last breath of Kilmara. As she opened it, ink began to rise from the pages, forming letters mid-air. They spelled out a single instruction. To free them, you must write their names into the ledger of living air. Mara's pulse quickened. She understood the library's books were not merely records. They were prisons, binding the memories and spirits of those lost beneath the loch. To release them, she would need to create a new ledger, one written in breath, in life, in movement. One that existed outside the ink and water. The first figure approached. Its face was pale, eyes hollow yet urgent. Mara hesitated, then spoke its name aloud. The water pulsed. The figure shimmered, and for a fleeting moment, its mouth moved, forming a smile before dissolving into droplets of water that sparkled and rose upward. Encouraged, Mara began the process. One by one, she called the names of the villagers she could remember, each sound carrying power, each syllable unraveling the bindings of the library. As she did, she felt a strange lightness in her chest, a rhythm in her heartbeat that matched the flow of the water around her. But the library resisted. Shelves trembled, books flew open, ink spilling like black smoke. The robed figure appeared again, mask cracking further, and spoke in a voice that reverberated through every book, every page, every drop of water. Do not release them all. Some must remain to remember. Mara's hands shook. The ledger was incomplete. There were too many, and time, or what she perceived as time, was slipping through her fingers. One misstep, and she would become another story in the library, another page in the endless loch. She paused. The children, the adults, the faces of those who had vanished centuries ago hovered before her. Their eyes were pleading, patient yet terrified. The air, her lungs, her chest, her very breath felt as though it were under the control of the library. Every inhalation was heavier, every exhalation weighed with memory. Mara drew a deep breath. Then she began again, faster, naming each person, feeling their essence lift from the water. The library shuddered in protest. Pages flapped violently, yet the light of the freed villagers grew brighter with each name spoken. By the end, the reading room was a maelstrom of ink, air, and memory. Mara's voice cracked, her lungs burned, and finally a silence fell. The water calmed, the figures were gone, the books had returned to their shelves. The library itself seemed smaller, quieter, though the echoes of centuries lingered. Mara floated in the shallow pool, exhausted but alive. When she emerged onto the shore, the first hint of dawn kissed the loch. The rising sun sparkled across the surface, and for the first time since her arrival, she felt the loch exhale a gentle, mournful sigh that carried both relief and warning. The village remained visible above the waterline, empty yet whole. Mara knew some stories would always remain in the loch. Some memories were too deep to free, but the villagers, the ones who had once cried, struggled, and drowned, had been given a second chance. And somewhere beneath the surface, the pages of the library settled into silence, waiting patiently for the next reader to arrive. Chapter 9, The Ink That Lives. The calm of Loch Morven was deceptive. To the casual observer, the water lay like polished glass, reflecting the gray skies of early morning and the distant hills in perfect symmetry. But Mara knew better. The loch held memories that moved beneath the surface, stories that churned quietly, waiting for the next hand to disturb them. She had spent the night on the shore, listening to the whispers of pages in her mind. Though the drowned villagers had been freed, their departure left an emptiness in the reading room, as if the library itself had sighed in disapproval. She felt its gaze, patient, expectant, waiting for her to return. By noon, Mara had donned her wetsuit. She carried the brass key, still heavy in her pocket, its surface etched faintly with patterns that pulsed like veins. She waded into the loch, water curling around her ankles, cool and alive. With each step, she could feel the pull of the submerged manor beneath her, the library beckoning with a silent promise. The doors opened without resistance. Inside, the water pooled shallowly, reflecting the shelves above like a fractured sky. The air smelled faintly of ink and salt. Shelves shifted subtly as she passed, as though the library itself were breathing, adjusting its shelves to greet her. And there, at the center of the room, she saw it, a book unlike any she had encountered before. Its cover was black, smooth, yet seemingly alive, the surface shifting under her gaze like rippling water. The ink that formed its title crawled subtly, reshaping itself continuously. The lives we draw. Mara's pulse quickened. She approached, hand trembling. The book opened as she reached it, pages flipping in a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat. The ink rose from the paper, forming letters in midair, glowing faintly like bioluminescent creatures. Do you wish to see the ink that breathes? The words hovered, then reformed into a spiral, pulling her gaze downward. The letters twisted, coiling around one another, forming shapes she could not identify. She blinked. When she looked again, the words had shifted, forming new sentences. Every reader feeds it. Every breath nourishes it. Every thought becomes part of the page. Mara swallowed hard. She understood immediately. This was not merely a book. It was alive. The ink itself contained memory, thought, and intent. It could observe, record, and, if allowed, control. The water around her pulsed, pages lifted from the shelves, spiraling toward her in a vortex of black letters. Mara stepped back instinctively, but her boots skimmed the surface, and she realized the water was thicker, heavier, almost sentient. It moved with purpose, guiding her toward the book. Read, and it will show you what it desires. Her hands found the pages. The ink began to rise, forming scenes in three-dimensional relief above the paper. Mara saw herself, yes, but also the loch, the library, the villagers, all intertwined. The ink did not merely depict, it recreated, breathed, reshaped reality itself. From the water beneath her, shapes began to form. Shadows of those who had once been trapped in the library appeared faceless, reaching toward the pages. They whispered in unison, "It remembers, it learns, do not falter." The air in the reading room thickened, charged with the weight of countless stories. Mara realized that each turn of the page carried consequences beyond comprehension. The ink would consume her thoughts, her fears, her memories, and imprint them upon the fabric of the library. A sudden movement drew her attention. The masked figure appeared again, its robe flowing like ink in water. It gestured toward the book, then toward Mara. "Do you understand, reader?" it asked. Its voice was everywhere at once, echoing through the shelves and beneath the water. "This is not merely a story. It is life, folded and rewritten. The ink chooses. You may guide it or be absorbed." Mara's mind raced. To engage with the book was to risk herself, to allow her consciousness to merge with the living ink, but to turn away, she knew, was not an option. The library did not forgive hesitation. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hands fully upon the pages. The ink surged upward, coiling around her wrists, her forearms climbing like tendrils. A sharp, cold shot through her veins, but her vision cleared. The letters resolved into words, forming scenes she could manipulate with thought alone. Draw the world, fold it, bend it, shape it with breath. Mara's mind raced. She could feel the loch, the library, the freed villagers, the echoes of Kilmara, all vibrating within her consciousness. The ink responded to her fear, her wonder, her imagination. She realized then that she was not merely reading, she was creating, shaping reality in this underwater library. Hours, or perhaps days, passed in a suspended haze. The lines between herself and the ink blurred. Her reflection in the shallow water beneath the marble floor was no longer singular. It multiplied, each version turning pages, writing, breathing. She could see herself as diver, reader, scribe, prisoner, and creator, all at once. The masked figure watched silently, its cracked mask revealing the darkness within, the void from which all stories emerged. And then it spoke, softly, almost reverently. "Every reader leaves a mark. Every life inscribed becomes eternal. But remember, the ink does not forgive the unwary." A sudden flicker of movement drew Mara's gaze upward. A volume lifted from the topmost shelf, spinning slowly in the air. It opened, and the ink leaped outward, forming words that wrapped around her like a cocoon. She gasped, yet the words did not suffocate. They filled her with insight, showing her histories long forgotten, tales of the drowned village, lives folded into pages she could scarcely comprehend. The loch remembers, the ink remembers. You are both now remembered. Mara understood. The library had given her power, but at a cost. Every breath she took, every thought she imagined, every memory recalled, was ink now, part of the living story. She could free or trap, heal or consume, write or be written. The loch, the library, the ink, they were all alive, and she was now bound to them forever. As she exhaled, the water around her shimmered. Pages spun freely, characters forming and dissolving, stories looping infinitely. The library pulsed with life, and Mara, breathing, thinking, trembling, realized the truth. The ink was alive, and she was its scribe.